Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
Cannabiz, you guys are a household name in the industry. You mind just telling us, everybody listening who hasn't heard your story, why did you guys start Cannabiz Media?
It started on a bike ride in 2014. I was out with my co-founder. I said, we need to look into this space. There's a lot going on here. And neither one of us knew a lot about it, but we both came from sort of regulated information. And, over time, we, looked more into it. And then, a little less than a year later, I was on the wrong side of a reorg. I'm like, it's time, let's start. So we started looking into the cannabis space. And what I found in starting to look at the data, I'm the chief data officer, was the state where I live, Connecticut, was sharing all the data on their licenses using the same format that they had used for alcohol, which I looked at years ago. Like, oh, look, they have all this data here. Wow, they have all the violations. And as a sort of compliance person, I'm like, well, that's a great set of information to have. So then we started looking sort of state by state and realized, one, there's a lot of data out here, but two, nobody had aggregated it together to make a database of record. We'd come from, like the securities space, like stocks and bonds and all that stuff, like where, people track this information. Then we realized like every license is an asset that needs to be tracked. So sort of state by state, I'm in my living room typing in data from Delaware. Okay, one state done, Connecticut. And we started building it up that way in spreadsheets, and then we started using Airtable, and then we, more sophisticated, and now it's in AWS, run through, Algolia and other platforms. But we started trying to just help people get a sense of how big is this industry in terms of licenses, and what is there to be known about them. And we've always stayed in that license swim lane, and really tried to keep the focus there, and not get too out of focus by chasing other shiny things that popped up in the industry. So that's sort of the bit of the origin story.
What was the initial struggles? Because I love a good origin story, but you
Yeah.
saw a problem, and I would imagine that it's just the amount of data that's out there and keeping things up to date. That must be a
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah. Well, like one of the initial missteps we made was, we looked at a couple states. We looked at Connecticut because, well, we lived here. Let's figure out what we can. And then we learned that, well, Washington has a lot of data. And we went to Washington and looked at their data, and it was incredibly robust. So we made the mistake of thinking that, therefore, all states must be like Washington and they'll have all this data. So we sort of, in some ways, overbuilt all the fields that we're going to get. And then you realize that Washington was the outlier. Not everybody had, I'll say, 50 fields per license. Some states had none, like it's a PDF and that's all there was. So it was trying to understand how different it was. It also helped us realize, though, the value in aggregating it in a consistent way. So, from that lesson came the benefit of, this is our database, these are our rules. Let's make it consistent so that when our customers come to use it, they can realize that, a cultivator in one state may be called a producer someplace else. We're going to normalize that so that when you're trying to reach stores, you can find the dispensaries and the retailers, and here's how you do it. So I would say that was part of it. And then initially we just had a database of stuff. And as I went out to one of the first trade shows, walking around and explaining to people like, hey, we have leads. And they're like, well, do you have people and emails in there? Some. Well, they wanted more. And, we realized we had to do it. And that's the first time that somebody said, well, are you guys a CRM for the cannabis space? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, it sort of transitioned us from just being like something that you do research and, we're a database, to what's the solution that you're providing? And when it became a CRM, that's when we started to add in our own email tool, because people were getting kicked off the email platforms that were commercial, like MailChimp didn't want weed email on there. So we made that transition. We put in a very light CRM, but for some people that really helped them use us more as a solution and not just as a place to go look things up or try and find emails and whatnot. So those are a couple that come to mind, at least in the early days, where we're like, we need to, as my partner Larry would say, we need to pivot, and we certainly did.
Wow. I'm even thinking through. So initially you started as, hey, this is the problem we're going to solve. We're going to aggregate license information that's up to date in the states that are live. And then it slowly morphed to, okay, license information is good, but as a person that's trying to call into these licenses, I'm looking for who to contact.
Yeah, yeah, and that was that sort of next challenge. And what also helped us do that is when we started grabbing all those licenses, we started, of course, looking across state lines and understanding the concept of a multi-state operator, and to realize that there are rise dispensaries all over the country. We need to aggregate those so that when you go to sell, you're calling in at the company level at the top, because you may not always want to go to the GM of the store. You may want to go to the VP of operations who's headquartered in Chicago, because she's got the ability to write the big check. So that's something that we did consistently from the beginning. And as I've gone out talking to other sort of information companies in the space, they realize that Cannabiz Media was sort of like good with stores or good with that data because we rolled it up. And they realized that even though there's only about 12 to 13,000 stores, they change so frequently, they realize they're not really good at keeping up on that. And they trust us to do that. So we are the store data inside a lot of places on the internet where you'd find data about cannabis licenses, because it's just easier to have somebody that you trust who's going to do it on a predictable cadence, to update this data and to know that it's getting refreshed and whatnot, so that, the licenses are, and ideally the people and the contact data is strong as well. Because it's just, in the old days, people would say, well, I can do that myself. I can go at the state. Like, yeah, you can, but we track 150 regulators now. Are you really going to do that? Are you going to check every week or every month? I doubt it. So in that sense, the industry has changed, just I guess through a maturation process.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the use case of cannabis evolve from the early days of probably just people trying to sell into these licenses to where it is today?
Yeah. So early days, it was totally that. It's, they wanted to sell and they used our email platform. Some were better at it than others. There was definitely a lot of folks who would just spray and pray on the email, just hit the send button and, hope for the best. But over time, and this really started to happen around 2020, my business partner realized that there were questions that we could answer to help people in the financial space who are trying to do research. Like, how many public companies have licensed stores, or what's going on in the M&A space? So we invested a lot of time and effort to really track mergers and acquisitions in the space. So, for example, if you want us to know, what does a dispensary go for in the state of Connecticut or Massachusetts or Missouri, we have that data, because the way we looked at it was a license or an asset is changing hands from me to you. And oftentimes a price was affixed to that, or you could sort of deduce it. So we were able to build out, probably like over 800 transactions, what happened there and how the licenses moved. And so that people could really track that, because it was important for us to know from a sales and marketing standpoint. People need to know, like, you need to call GTI, not these guys anymore. So it was for that, but it also helped people do things like total addressable market analysis, because we were gathering license data as it changed. And that idea had come from a customer who said, we'd like to know about all the new licenses, specifically stores, by month, by state. And we're like, well, we could do that. And then we realized, wow, there's a lot there. We could do more than stores. And that actually became the basis for the Canna Curio pods and a blog post that I've been doing. I think I just sent blog post 118 to the marketing team, where we've looked at that data. So I actually use our product to rate those. So there's that piece of helping people understand how the market is changing. Like, where's it shrinking? Where's it growing? The other use case is really for compliance. As the market has matured, vendors want to make sure, especially banks, fintech, and insurance, that they're dealing with somebody who's got a legit license, that it's current and it's not covered in violations or bad things. So that is that's sort of the business that I came from in previous lives, where you're focused on compliance, because compliance, there's typically a penalty if you get something wrong. So those customers tend to renew at a higher rate to our product and really embed us into their workflow and sometimes into their operations. So those are, those last two, the research and that compliance piece, are where the market has matured to, because we've been at it since 2015, and you sort of expect that as a business matures, where they want to focus to make sure they're doing sort of best practices from a compliance standpoint.
I just thought about this. If I was a retailer and I was using Cannabiz, I would do a lot of research on where, from a location perspective, where are the licensees around me, and where are the potential licenses that are going to be opened up around me. What does
Yes.
that look like for the next year or 2 years in terms of market saturation?
Well, people do use us for that, certainly. Sadly, not all states will share who's applied and which ones are pending. I mean, that is harder data to get, or simply not available. Like if you go to Colorado, like, here's the active licenses, we're not going to give you anything else. However, over the last 3 years, I've had us insert some other data into the database that has been very illuminating. For a while, we tracked unlicensed stores because they leave a data trail. And my hypothesis was that in some places, those businesses are only lacking a regulator and a license number. They've got a website, they have a phone number, they have a location, they may have a menu, they probably have a Telegram app and lots of other stuff that, sort of is a tell that they're unlicensed. But like, if you pull up our data in New York and say, show me unlicensed, you can see how they surround stores that have legit licenses. Furthermore, around the same time, we went and went to all the states, virtually all of them, and grabbed another set of licenses, one for smoke shops and one for vapes, because that is a licensed activity as well.
Yeah.
So you start to, draw that complexion on the map, and it's like, oh my gosh, like if you go to Texas, there's only 3 licensed stores that sell cannabis, and they're, highly restricted medical. But then you bring in unlicensed, not a lot, smoke and vape, a ton. And then finally you bring in CBDs or hemp retail, and you start to reach like 10,000 stores or licenses. So it's a great way for people to sort of get an understanding, like, what am I up against? In my state of Connecticut, they are going after these smoke and vape shops for selling cannabis, sort of, out the back door or with a secret handshake or something like that. And they're forever written up, where the attorney general, that has been his big push. But the thing I joke, or not joke about, but sort of laugh at, is that these are licensed businesses by the state of Connecticut. They're just licensed for smoke and or vape. They're not licensed for cannabis, but they're like, oh, these illegal businesses. Well, on this side, they're okay. And I'm sure you're taking their licensing fees, but yeah, they're selling something they shouldn't be. And that makes it hard for the legitimate retailers who are trying to comply, get their product tested, et cetera. So there's a lot of, things that we've tried to do to help give people some of that planning ability. I think you're talking about, like, what does my local market look like, and what should I be on the lookout for? And those are definitely some of the areas that, we learned a lot in tracking data from, like in California, they would share when electricity got shut off, and it helped figure out where the illegal grows were.
Wow.
Or I think in New York, we looked at some of the 311 recordings, or not the recordings, the data, to figure out where illicit cannabis operations were. So we would just put those in the database as a data point, so that people could see that, yeah, the store got shut down, but another one probably popped up either in the same location or near it. So, those are some of the places where we dug deep and found some interesting insights that, we thought were in some cases either counterintuitive or validating, like, yeah, there's a problem here in this state.
What do you have coming up? Like, what other data sets are you building on top of your stack?
So for us, we've been looking more at a little bit of the brand space. In addition, we've been working on a partnership to current in their bills. So we've talked about that, some trade shows. That's kind of unique. The other area that I'm really wanting to focus on is doing a better job or digging into some of the badge data that's out there. And certainly for the business that you're in, trying to understand and follow that, because many states require you to have a badge if you're going into a cannabis operation. And if you're going into different ones, you need multiple badges. And just trying to understand how that data is managed by the state and if they make it available, because the beauty of a data set like that, much like the licenses, is that it's maintained by the state. It's maintained by somebody that everybody trusts for the most part. So, having access to that and understanding, once again, the size and shape of the market, how many people are in there. I think in Arizona, their badge population is somewhere around like 16,000, which just sort of blows me away.
16,000.
Yeah. Now those could be active, inactive, past licenses, but it's a big number. And other states, share this information. Some do a good job, some don't. But just to help you understand, but I know in talking to some in this space, in the recruiting space, they're like, well, Ed, if we could have access to that data and we start looking to fill a position in the state, if I know that Tommy has a license and Ed doesn't, I'm probably going to go to him first because he's already vetted. He could start working today. Ed's got to buy the license, pass the test. He might not be able to work for 2 weeks. So in some ways, it's a competitive data advantage. And it's early days, but I think there may be some. I'll say it's on the drawing board. I'm not even going to say it's in the pipeline yet, but I just think there's more data there that we could dig into.
Yeah, if I was a brand, let's say, and I was talking to somebody that she has a grow in Oregon. She expanded to New York, right? So and they're white. They're what is that word? Asset light approach. There you go, in New York.
Yeah.
How can somebody that's looking to say, hey, I'm established in this state, I'm looking for an expansion in another state, how can they leverage Cannabiz to identify which states provide the best opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a profound question, because how do you define best? Like for somebody in that situation where they've got a brand that's well known in
Well, I was thinking, what does Cannabiz give metadata on how well locations are doing based on how many locations are taken offline, sold, the market saturated?
So we do have data that we've gathered in sort of that research part of the product, but it's really state data. So we have information, let's say, on patients and how that number has changed. Any sale data that a state provides or product data, we will provide that in a normalized fashion, so that if you wanted to compare states, you certainly could. In that example of somebody wanting to be in Oregon and they're maybe looking, is New York the place to go? I think some of the analysis they'd need to do would almost be more like sort of that true market research type, where do brands do well in a state like that, or are people just price shopping? And that's where there's a whole other part of the cannabis information industry, companies that started there, like Headset, BDSA, Hoodie Analytics, Pistol, Little Alerts, who've really started to track that. Happy Cabbage Analytics, where they're really getting down into the metric data and biotrack data to really uncover what kind of opportunities there are, and also what kind of mistakes you want to avoid. Like I was at CannaDataCon down in Miami the last 2 years, and hearing them talk about things to watch out for, and Happy Cabbage Analytics talked about inventory is debt. You've tied up all this money and it's debt to you, and you have to manage that so carefully, and too many operators don't. So they really dug into that. So, going back to your example, having access to that sort of broad sales data by state, I think is probably the best way to do it. It's not really our sweet spot. We are not retail aficionados, but we know the people who are doing that, and some of the info that they are gathering by hitting those menus multiple times a day to come back and say, hey, Tommy, there's a stock out. You should get in there. It's a lead. You should sell pre-rolls because they are out. And, now's the time to get in there. So it's become this very rapid fire kind of retail environment with really good data and true leads and sales intent like opportunities. So I think I would advise that example, that person to make sure that they are well aware of that data. And some of them make their services available to license holders, so light value of their product. We do the same thing at Cannabiz Media to help people see sort of what's out there.
Yeah, we use you guys. So full disclosure, we use Cannabiz and we use you guys for a multitude of different ways. One obviously is to get the most accurate data on active licenses. Who are the active licenses? What's their status? Information on owners, executives, etc. Which I'm actually really impressed that you actually have that data, because that's probably really hard to obtain.
It is.
Extremely. How actually, I'm always curious about this. How or if at all are you guys leveraging AI now?
AI has definitely become a part of the equation for us. It used to be, I used to have a much bigger data team, and it was a lot of arms and legs work and going through, whatever documents we could. There are still ways where that old-fashioned research works, like where states do publish applications to say that, hey, Ed applied for this license or he got it, and those PDFs are still around. People would go into that. Now we're finding that AI is really good at going in and looking for the name field and the email field and the phone number field and gathering that data in ways that were only manually available. And there are other tools too that help us sort of use the old term spider the web to go find information, but we have so many examples to provide. Like one area that moving toward AI with is in violations, which is something that we've been tracking since day one. So I think right now we probably have somewhere close to 11,000 violations. They're all categorized by hand. But I also have a data set, like a large library of 11,000 that have already been categorized. So we can go and say, listen, here's the new violations, categorize them for us so that it's happening faster and perhaps more consistently. And in some of the ones that I checked and did by hand, AI suggested some things that were really good. Like we missed it. They said, yes, Ed, these 3 categories are absolutely right for this violation, but you may also want to consider the not categorized category, and here's why. I'm like, yeah,
wow,
I like that. So we're trying to use it for as many things as we can to also help us fill gaps and holes. Like any database provider, we've got what's typically referred to as the fill rate. Like, well, do you have emails? Do you have addresses? Do you have this? Do you have that? So we can take those holes and say, could you find this information? And the results have been astounding, because the tools have just gotten better and they really help us dig in and not only fill it once, but then keep it updated. Because the joke I used to, in the early days when it was human researchers doing this, it was a little bit of the Hotel California. Like you could check in, but you never check out because, maybe we read about you in a news article that you were the GM of some store, but we never knew that you left someplace else. So, so we've tried to be better about mining LinkedIn and getting information to see how people move. But that's always a challenge. It's the movement of the data. It's not just getting the data.
I was gonna say, I mean, I was talking to it's a restaurant data, restaurant info, and these 2 founders have aggregated hundreds of thousands of restaurant data. And this is before the AI days, where they would say that they would go through each license once a year to update it once a year. Now with AI, how often are you combing through licenses and updating information?
I mean, we've always updated things every day, and our cadence has just gotten so much better with AI, where we can go back. I mean, what I've learned in the sort of the information industry and also in the contact data industry is that, big contact providers that cover many industries tend to work on a quarterly basis. That's
Mm.
sort of how often things generally get refreshed. So, um, we're trying to stick to that. It doesn't make sense to do anything on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But for licenses, though, there are some states that we actually hit weekly because there's enough turmoil there, let's say, or enough new license issuance where it does make sense to do it. But with AI, it definitely is sort of better, faster, cheaper. And as you train it and get smarter about building your own workflows, you're definitely turning over a lot to the machine, but you can also have a more predictable cadence, which benefits, customers, and it benefits us too. And if anything comes out as an anomaly or goes into the exception bucket, we can look at it, but better we're spending our time there than looking up licenses by hand, or, like I said in the origin story, Ed in the living room, type in Delaware licenses, row by row to get them into, or cell by cell to get them into the database.
I'm just talking to you. I'm thinking about different ways to use the data that you're gathering. Not only if I was a retailer, what we're looking at whether or not licenses are active, but you made a really good point where you're looking at violations on licenses. And if I was a retailer, I would look at, okay, well, what are they looking at right now?
Yeah.
And what are all of the last 3 months, the violations that have come up? I need to be able to be prepared that when they come through the doors, that I'm up to speed with what they're looking for.
Absolutely. So this May I did a presentation to CANRA, which is the Association of Regulators, and I did it based on a full year's worth of violations from 2024. And there were I think there were 2,500 violations, and I just dug into them. I mean, it was probably one of the hardest white papers I've ever done. And it dug into exactly that. Like, if you're in this state, here's what you probably got busted for. And there were definitely, long lines on the bar graph. Like, in this state, they really focus on operations and record keeping. In this state, they focus on security and something else. Like, it was drastically different. We also shared that if you're in Michigan, you're going to pay a lot of fines because they accounted for 35% of all the fines issued in the country last year.
What?
And there's a 30 plus page document that they published, good for them, that explains what the fines are for wrongdoing. It's 30 some pages. Like, if this happens, and most of those fines, I think, ran from like $5,000 to $10,000. So, yeah, absolutely fascinating data there. And to your point, it does give you some insight as to, how you need to be mindful of what folks are looking for. Like in California, my observation was a lot of the things that they were finding were things that they could probably find from records that were submitted. It didn't look like they were as on site doing, knocking doors, because it's a giant state. I don't know how big their enforcement arm is. And the other part that I learned actually from the camera team is that in a lot of cases, it's not the regulators who are driving this. They are just enforcing the regulations that they have been given. And so in Michigan, that's how it works. And in other states, maybe they don't do fines. So it was fascinating to see. I think you're absolutely right from a compliance and from a training standpoint. Like, I used to work in a restaurant too when I started out, and just, learning all those rules that you had to know, like, don't keep the ice scoop in the ice machine. You're going to get hit up by the food inspector, because that's bad, and cross contamination, whatnot. So a lot of that stuff does play into the cannabis space. Like, here are the things you should be mindful of, and we have the data now to back it up.
You know what data that I find fascinating, but I don't think it's being tracked right now, is brand positioning or retail positioning.
So how do you define those? I want to make sure I understand that.
Well, for me, the emphasis of this is I think that everybody is going after the same audience. I think right now, retailers and we're going after the recreational, maybe medical, and in certain states, it's all about THC, which is unfortunate.
Yes.
and that's the positioning. But there's a swath, and I'm hoping that we get more and more and more information on this as studies progress, of the health industry. So can I sleep better? My gut,
Yeah.
my focus. There is a natural way of really, really marketing to these specific people, and that industry is 3 times larger than the cannabis industry today.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wonder how many brands or how many retailers are actually positioning themselves for a larger market and not competing with kind of the rest.
It's a great question. I mean, it's not something that we track, but I remember being at the show that used to be called the CWCB Expo in New York, and there was a guy, I think he ran a fund, and he was a great speaker, really compelling. And I remember he put up a graph, sort of described what you just did: medical, recreational, and then the middle part he called wellness. And I'm like, that's a smart way to position it, like
Mhm.
making you think more of sort of that solution. And I think we've seen some CPG type brands try to do that, like joy, or they'll use words that try and connote what they think this product should do for you and for you and for you. So I think with all the CPG emphasis in our industry, we're just going to continue to move toward that. And I know, once again, all those companies I cited before, like Cody Analytics, they had been in another industry where they really understand CPG. So cannabis is just another place for them to put that same rule book and to help people understand, what's moving, what's not, and perhaps track into some of those almost attributes that will likely move the market.
Hmm. Yeah. And maybe we're a little bit early. You never want to be,
Well, yeah, right.
the pioneers usually get slaughtered, and they open the door for everybody else to get rich.
They took all the arrows going over the hill, is how my boss
Yeah.
used to describe it.
Where do you, and we talked about this before we recorded, where do you think 2025, October 16th, you have all this data? You're in a very unique position to actually get an opinion on, is where's the industry today and where do you think the industry is going?
So the industry and the number of licenses has been contracting for a while. It's a gentle decline. I think that's going to continue. In certain states, we're still operating under moratoriums. Oklahoma, there may be one in Michigan now, which is probably long overdue. Oregon has had one. So I don't really see that changing because, one of the first analysts I saw come the industry, Vivian Azer, many years ago, said basically there's only so much that can be consumed by the existing population. And Bo Whitney, a well-known economist in the space, wrote about this a few years ago, and he said, all the cannabis the U.S. needs is grown in California and Oregon. That would meet the need of the United States. So everything else is kind of superfluous. So I think working through that is going to be really hard because we still have these state-by-state markets that are just hard to get good economies of scale if I have to build a vertical operation in every state. So I think it's going to be hard for the industry to figure that out. And given the current sort of federal regulatory structure and the signals we're getting, it's not going to happen soon. So I think there's a challenge there. On the plus side, and sort of what has driven us this whole time and other data entrepreneurs, is it's a big honking industry. I mean, it's $100 billion industry. It's not going anywhere. And in other industries, if you've got $100 billion industry, the data and solutions part of that should be probably $1 billion. We're not even close to that yet. So I'm optimistic long term. Short term, I think there's a lot of challenges that are going to have to get figured out. And the stroke of the pen from the White House could change a lot of things, but you can't bet on sort of hope being the strategy, because you may be waiting a long time.
With your data, have you, I always think to myself, when a state goes live or an emerging state, how many years does it take before there's just a crash in terms of the price? right? There's usually
Yeah.
like a 2 year kind of
So
euphoria, and
I think in 2016, I wrote an article that likened a state issuing its license program to what they call an organizational behavior, how a team builds, and they call it forming, storming, norming, and performing. So the four stages of any team, right? So you bring the team together, then they fight and whatnot, then they norm and sort of get things settled, and then they perform. And I tried to liken that to cannabis states, like because the storming is all the lawsuits that happen. So most states tend to get up and running after they announce it 18 months usually. Oklahoma was unique. They did it in about 6 months where they just had a program. Here's your license, go start growing. I think that it depends on how many licenses they issued at the beginning. Like Massachusetts has gone through that where their prices have collapsed and they're so different from Connecticut, which is much more tightly controlled. So I think it takes time. Sometimes it can be a couple years, but from what I've read from some of the financial analysts is that time has compressed. It's happening faster now where the price is settling. And, also I think some of the bloom is off the rose. You don't really have cannabis tourism anymore like we did in the early days where people would fly out to Colorado and like giggle and be like, oh, I can't believe I'm here. So I think it's gotten more normalized. I mean, for the consumer, in most states, you can buy cannabis. So it's definitely a contracted period, but I don't have a real number, but it's certainly gotten shorter from everything that I've read.
if you were to start a brand today, what state would you go to?
I mean, one state that everybody has said is doing well is Missouri. And I think just at how they've managed the number of licenses and maybe the size of the state and the market, that's one that comes to mind. But I guess if you flip it on its head and, you went hemp THC, the world may still be your oyster for a couple of years. I mean, look at Target going into their home state of Minnesota and making THC beverages available on their shelves. So I think that is not to be ignored. And, going to some of the CANRA conferences and listening to people speak about it's one it's one molecule. We can regulate it in a similar fashion. It doesn't need to be hemp versus cannabis. So I think you play that into it, and almost any market may work because some of those states really have entrenched hemp THC businesses, like
I
Texas, North Carolina.
Yeah, I it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate what's happening with him. I just find it. Yeah, I mean, cousins fighting each other, and what are you gonna do?
Yeah, right. It's true. That's a good way to look at it. So
I Oh, sorry. We're at the top of the hour. I was gonna ask you. I was gonna geek into some data, but before I get into anything, is there anything that we didn't talk about, Ed, that you think our audience should hear?
I would definitely sort of just reiterate that part about focusing on brands and maybe digging deeper into that because I think in the future, brands are going to have an outsized impact on how people consume. They're going to want that consistent experience across state lines. And I just think based on all the other things that we see in consumer packaged goods and just in marketing, a brand can be really powerful. So I think that's an area to dig into more, whether it's through data or just through analysis of trying to understand what compels people to purchase and why. And it's not something that we focus on the Cannabiz Media, but we see sort of sister companies out there or colleagues who are trying to really understand that. And I think that's just an area not to be overlooked.
Yeah, I would I don't envy brands, especially nationwide brands, because you really have to really think about how mature a market is. And every market is very different depending on the maturity.
Mhm.
So you kind of, I don't think that there's a one size fits all when you're going to different states. You have to like really sit back and like, okay, well, what is the minutia of this state and how should we position ourselves?
Right. Like in some states, and you can still see this where in certain states, flower is all that's sold, almost not all, but it's a vast preponderance. And maybe that's from on medical side, it could be regulatory derived or not. But then in other states, you start to see edibles and other products really growing. And then if you dig further, just as we would dig into licenses, you dig further in that data, you see that, it's people my age who are buying this kind of product because they're old and they can't sleep. So they want some sort of sleep aid or something. So like you really do need to dig deeply into the data. And fortunately, I think your podcast is helping promote this, is there's a lot of data out there to help answer these questions and to provide those insights to say, listen, if you're trying to sell to 21 to 25-year-olds, they're probably still buying this and they want high THC and a low price point, versus people who are 45 to 60 want this. And that should really help inform a lot of decisions, a lot of operational decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're out of time. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, actually, how can our listeners find you?
Easy to find. We're cannabiz.media. So cannabiz.media. And all of our contact information is there. And, we'd love to hear from you and answer any data questions we can.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tommy. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access the full archive of episodes from the show.